Hey guys, what is going on? Thanks so much for watching the channel. Matt Smith here as always. Before I get rolling, like and subscribe. You know the drill. First thing we got to start off with, clearly, Happy New Year 2025 already. Man, I saw on social media the other day, somebody said, every day now we move forward, we are closer to 2050 than we are to the year 2000. And that's a mind effort right there. That is, we're just old. What can I say? We're just getting old. Anyway, I appreciate everybody for being here. I wanted to start off by saying a very, very sincere and heartfelt thank you to everybody who has subscribed and supported. You have no idea how much it's meant to me as I've gone through this transition personally here over the last, 3, 4 months or so. But I do want to touch on some CU topics because we've had some news here as it's been, gosh, not even a week since the Alamo Bowl took place there in San Antonio. And I don't know about any of you guys, but I mean, there's a line in Seinfeld where Kramer, is living across the street from Kenny Rogers Chicken Roasters, and he's got the bright red neon sign out there, and he's my rods and cones are all screwed up. Well, that's what it feels like for me. I have no concept of days and time right now with Christmas and New Year's and that New York trip for the Heisman, which was amazing, and the week in San Antonio. It's just been a lot. It's certainly been a lot, and definitely a lot of fun this season. And yeah, it sucked to end the way that it did, no doubt about it. It's a bit of a downer note to end the year on, but it doesn't take away from the incredible turnaround that we've had a chance to be witness to over the last couple of years, and certainly some of the unbelievable, team and individual performances that we've seen over the last couple of years as well. But over these next couple of weeks, I'll get my head screwed on straight, and it'll be interesting to see what happens here over the summer because not only do they have to focus, and when I say summer, I mean off season. They definitely have to focus on building a new team, which they're right now in the process of doing, right, continuing to do. But they've also got to work with all these guys who are going to the pros to get them ready, and pro days and all-star games and Shrine Bowls coming up at the end of this month, which is a huge week for LeJontay and Will and Shiloh, and I think Cam is going to that as well, and Shedeur is, and Coach Prime told Shedeur that he's got to throw one session of 7-on-7 so his guys have some chemistry with a quarterback and have their quarterback with them, make them look good, which I love. I think that's awesome. Just, another testament to the kind of leader and teammate that Shedeur is. Said no problem. Happy to do it. So he never really backs down from competition. A couple other things. As I mentioned, they are still trying to, rebuild this team. They are. And we knew that there would be some coaching departures, as there always are. And we got those last week with, the day after the Alamo Bowl, Vincent Dancy, edge coach and outside linebackers coach, heading to Mississippi State. Phil Lodeholt, their offensive line coach, also heading to Mississippi State. Wish both those guys the best. Both very, very, upstanding men, gentlemen. Really enjoyed getting a chance to interact with both those guys. There are some losses that I think can cripple you, but there are some where I think you can be just fine. I think they'll be just fine. I'm not concerned on either one of those. The only bad timing of it all, I think, is because clearly Colorado is in the process of trying to rebuild their offensive line. This is something that I talked about with Brian earlier this week on our podcast that we do. And if you don't check it out, please go check it out on Brian Howell's channel. We do an episode every week, have all season. It's a lot of fun. We get into a lot of good stuff. And one of the things we spoke about was just the inopportune timing of Lodeholt's departure, considering the fact that it's very evident based upon what's been publicly reported on their visits that they've got coming in from some of these guys in the transfer portal. Colorado is trying to rebuild their offensive line. It's very evident. They didn't get the job done this year. Running the ball and stopping the run were priorities 1A and 1B. They made a giant leap in stopping the run this year. Running the ball, they didn't really make a big leap whatsoever. And protecting the quarterback, I mean, they got better, certainly, than last year. But were they a good unit? No. They weren't. And the scheme didn't help him out at times. Certainly sitting in 10 personnel all the time and expecting 5 guys to be able to hold up when teams are sending pressures and exotics and, relying on Shedeur to point it all out. That's really the only time you can get away with it, which is why we kind of talk about how moving forward, they will definitely have to adjust and their approach and the way they do some things, certainly. And from a philosophical standpoint, sitting in 10 personnel all day, I mean, I'm sitting there watching the college football playoff over the last couple of weeks and going, man, you sit in 10 personnel against these guys, you're getting killed. So I just don't know how sustainable it is moving forward. I think they got to think about really the overall approach to how they want to win football games. And now without Shedeur, I know they're going to do that. It'll just be interesting to see how that looks and what form that takes and what shape it takes. So, like I said, without Loadholt, they've got a bunch of offensive line, visits this week, some intriguing ones, certainly. But because they don't have top-of-the-line resources, they're not going after real top-of-the-line guys, in my opinion. Now, you got some guys who've had some big offers for sure, and, there's a couple really intriguing prospects in there, but it's going to be, kind of one of these developing situations where you got to get guys in the fold, and offensive line is the hardest unit to build as it is. It's the hardest unit to coach, and it's the hardest unit to develop because you got to have 5 guys acting as one. If not, the whole thing doesn't work. And getting 5 guys in college that you can trust and rely on is not an easy thing to do either, which we saw many different times this year with the constant rotation in and out of the lineup and the final form it took where you had 2 freshmen starting and, it was a mishmash really, certainly in part due to Phillip Houston's injury at right tackle, but we'll see how it goes because not only did you lose Khalil Benson, which we expected, quite frankly, Khalil, great young man, excellent young man, in and out of the lineup. He came in, was he going to be a tackle? Was he going to be a guard? They moved him around. I don't know. There was some good, there was some bad, and he was hurt at the end of the year. And I think for them and for him, it makes sense to start anew. Quite frankly, I think Colorado understands and is really more than anything trying to set a standard that we may bring you in, but if you don't get the job done, don't be comfortable here. And certainly with an offensive line that woefully underperformed, really, again, even though they were better, you've got to have a higher standard for it if you want to compete at the top levels of college football. We saw in the BYU game, they got manhandled by BYU's defensive front, and part of that was a scheme, certainly, which I didn't like, and we've talked about that before, and, other parts of it was just talent. So we also saw Hank Zielinskis, who was their starting center, enter the portal and transfer to Rutgers, which, again, another excellent young man. I wish nothing but the best for both Hank and Khalil, both great kids. And, for Hank, he just had that weird problem pop up this year where he just was, mishandling snaps. And it wasn't like everything else was falling apart. It was just he could not, for some reason, get rid of, I don't know if it was the yips, I'm not sure what it was, but he couldn't get rid of it. And it was confusing to me because, on tape, he had some good games. I mean, certainly it wasn't the best, but he had some good games. There's no doubt about it, and played at a high level at times. And I thought that maybe that was something that you could coach out of him. But once that happened, I think it might have been 3 games in a row, they just said, that's it. We can't risk it. We cannot risk it right now with the margin for error we have. And they went to Cash Cleveland, and Cash stepped up and I thought did a fine job for being a freshman walk-on who had never taken a rep with the first team the entire time he'd been here. So but also that's not ideal, and it really shouldn't be their plan for next year either, which is why you've seen some guys who are centers come into the fold here in these visit lists. So we'll see who they're able to lock down, and to do that without an offensive line coach can be tricky, probably, I would imagine. And Pat Shurmur was an offensive line coach for years, so you've got that, and so I don't think it's going to be like crisis mode or anything, but it's definitely a challenge when kids are coming to visit and they're not sure who their position coach is, and they're going to spend more time with their position coach than any other coach. So that's challenging, or at least it can be. Even Carty Smith, who was their recruit, they flipped from USC, he tweeted out the emoji after it was announced that Loadholt was leaving. So I guess good that it was done after signing day, right? So you didn't have any of those guys second guessing. But either way, it's a situation that they're clearly putting as priority 1 again this offseason. And that is a question that I didn't have a chance to ask Coach Prime after the Alamo Bowl press conference about priorities this offseason. Just the way that they set it up, it wasn't a good time. And I'm not one of those guys that likes to ask questions too early. And quite frankly, after a loss like that, it doesn't feel like the opportune moment to talk about the future when everybody's sitting there in the stench of that loss and is really down like they were. So it's one of those things where we'll just have to wait and see because we don't have that answer, and we don't really have another opportunity to talk to Coach Prime for months. So I guess wait and see and find out. So that's some CU notes that certainly I kind of wanted to touch on. Just it's clear from the outside looking in what their priorities are. We heard they were tied to that 1-2 lane running back. I think it's Mekhi Davis. Then Oregon comes in with a big offer. We'll see if they're still in with him. They have to improve. They have to improve there. And the other thing I want to just reiterate here, if you're going to change the way you approach the game and maybe the way that you want to play, you got to get some tight ends, some H-backs, some hybrid guys in here. They got Atkins out of the portal. That's one. You need like three. You need like three guys who can play, who you trust to play. And maybe Savell Smalls will be factored in. I think they're not good enough there yet. And when you watch some of these offenses that are creative and use a lot of pre-snap motion and get in and out of different personnel with a lot of formational variety, and you open up your playbook to a whole new world of executing offense, and you take pressure off your quarterback, which I think that's got to be the plan heading into the season. Not that I don't think Salter can handle it, but you definitely have to be able to develop a running game. And under the structure that they had the last 2 years, going pure RPO, I don't know how effective it would have been overall, only because they didn't get much push up front. And so hopefully they can bring some guys in here that can move some defensive line back and get to second levels and get to the linebackers and, do things that way. Now, it'll also be helpful having a quarterback that's certainly looking more for the run, right? Shedeur was looking to throw. We know what Shedeur was looking to do, and, maybe pepper the run in there a little bit, but he wanted to play 10 personnel. We heard him in the podcast he has, the two legendary podcasts before the bowl game, talking about how he wanted to be, it's his last game in 10 personnel 90% of the time. He knows when he goes to the NFL, it's going to be a lot of 11 and 12, and there's a reason why. That's how you win games. That's how you win games in the league, right? And his talent and certainly their talent outside made up for a lot of that, to the point where outside of 5 performances this year, they were for the most part one-dimensional. In the 5 performances they did rush as a team for over 100 yards, they were 5-0. The proof is in the pudding. You got to be balanced, and if you watch the college football playoff, all these teams pretty damn good at doing both. Okay, you got to be able to have different weapons at your disposal and a versatile arsenal to attack opposing teams. So that's the priority, it looks like, from the outside looking in right now, and we'll see how it progresses, certainly, and looking forward to eventually getting a spring ball and winter conditioning, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of fun stuff going on there, and I was just kind of thinking about this ever-changing landscape of the college football playoff and how college athletics are structured. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands out there, you may have had 1 year of bad games. Well, bad games happen. It happens in the NCAA tournament. It happens in the NFL playoffs. It happens everywhere. It sometimes it just happens, but you don't have to have knee-jerk overreactions to, they got to completely rechange the seating and they got to remove AQs and automatic qualifiers for winning your conference. And college football as a whole right now is it's very dysfunctional, it's very disorganized, and I think they're doing the best they can considering the circumstances, and the circumstances are completely being void of leadership, both from the NCAA's perspective. All they're focused on is trying to get all the money back that they've lost over the last few years, because the players at the moment hold all the power, which is why they're going to go back to revenue sharing, which is, if they wouldn't have been so blind in the past and trying to take advantage of all these student athletes and just rob them blind, basically. A degree doesn't mean what it used to. Got news for you. It just doesn't. It's not a guarantee of anything, and you're making gazillions of dollars. They should get paid, and they should have recognized that a long time ago, and because they didn't, and because they were so hesitant, and because they were so greedy, that now we have the Wild West, where at the moment in time, it feels like the last stop at the OK Corral for these teams with massive, resources and purses and the ability to just dole out cash to whoever, which is why you're seeing Oregon and Ole Miss, these teams dominate in the portal because they have the most resources to offer, right? Whether you're talking about oil money or what have it, whatever's down there in Ole Miss, talking about Nike money up in Oregon. These programs with the giant donors are dominating at least roster transactions this offseason, primarily because of the resources that they're able to throw around. And it's tough to really put blame on young men for taking giant offers because that's life-changing money for a lot of these guys. But that's where you hear Coach Prime talk about financial literacy. He talked about that several different times to end the year, how that needs to be mandatory in college. I got news for him. That needs to be mandatory in high school. We need that way, way earlier as a society. We are sending way too many people out into the workforce, into the real world, unprepared, without the proper tools to be able to handle whatever life may throw their way. And when we're talking about young men who may be getting advice from this guy and that guy and that guy and not knowing what's credible, who they should be listening to. Maybe they think they should be listening to this guy, but really this guy's out of touch with the way it really goes. So it's a mess. It's a mess. We need unionized players, and hopefully the Dartmouth men's basketball team lawsuit that they dropped to unionize as a team in lieu of pursuing litigation that would overextend to all student athletes in a union. Hopefully that is taken seriously, and hopefully they get support. Whether it's not them, maybe it's another situation where we have someone who wants to be an advocate for players, because right now you've got guys like Nick Saban who knew that once you leveled the playing field with money, and it wasn't just the SEC that was going to be allowed to pay players under the table and just get away with it, right? Or these big schools, that he wouldn't have the advantage. So instead he's up in front of Congress talking about how bad NIL is. There's a lot of traditionalists that don't like it. Coach Prime is one of them, by the way, who he's like a healthy blend of new and old school, I would say. And when I say that, I'm talking about guys who don't love that the players have all this power right now. It's not what college football used to be. There is no part of this right now that's amateurism. And I'm on the fence. I'm on the side of the fence of good. There has been years and years and years of taking advantage of these student athletes while these schools just made money hand over fist. And now the chickens came home to roost. The problem is there's no real adults in the room that are trying to create a real structure that will benefit everybody. Even this revenue sharing stuff, it's to try and get the power back to the school. They want to control who's able to offer NIL. They want to control where their money's going. They don't want what's going on right now because they have no say in the matter, and kids do. Well, if they would then take it a step further and get over themselves and realize that what we're talking about are employees and employers, which is really what's happening. And instead of just going about it this ham-handed way, if we would talk about contracts and employers and rights, it would change everything. But that's where you need the leadership to come in. And every time we have these complicated conversations about what college sports are, okay, quite frankly, you instantly run into, well, that's where you need strong leadership. It's a mess. It's a mess. And actually, if you're on social media, I want to give you a guy that you should follow, okay? Let me just make sure that I got this guy's name right. Because, yeah, okay. So it's at Winter Sports Law on Twitter, on X, whatever. I'm not going to call it X. It's Twitter. At Winter Sports Law. This guy, Mitt Winter, he's an attorney at Kenny Hertz Perry LLC, college athletics attorney, business litigation, former Division I basketball player for William and Mary. But he does a lot of great updates on there, and he's very tapped in. And if you're out there and you're curious about this stuff and want to follow along, I really highly suggest you go find a couple sports attorneys, because this is all legal jargon. It's all politicians. And that's why I really hate it, because there's no people who have legitimate, student athlete experience within like the last 20 years. You have athletic directors that are trying kind of to advocate on behalf of the students, but more it's on behalf of the schools and making sure that they don't go belly up having to try and support all these other sports that are not football and basketball. So it's a mess. It's just a giant mess right now. And, the college football playoff will not be this iteration for the foreseeable future. It's a couple of years, then they're going to expand it to 16 teams and go from there. And so it's convoluted. I'm looking forward to this offseason following the story, because it will shape the future of collegiate athletics. And look, as we move forward, I think next week Brian and I are doing our season recap. We'll have our awards and stuff like that, and maybe I'll jump on with Adam and do a Buff Stampede roundtable like we always do before an end of the season. So we'll see how it all plays out, but we'll have plenty rolling in, and certainly it's never a dull time around Boulder. To close here, again, I wanted to say thank you to everybody out there. If you've subscribed, if you've commented, it's meant a lot to me for you to show me your support. It has. Drop yourself in the comments, and we'll be back. We'll be back here soon. I don't have a structured update, but I want to try and do at least one weekly update right now, Buffs related, while we're in the off season. And certainly once spring ball gets around, I do have every intention of covering that as always. And the other part I did want to mention is that if you're interested in advertising it all for next year, get in touch with me now. I've got a few people I'm talking to already, and certainly if I'm going to continue doing it this way, I got to have a better way to pay for it. And certainly with some of the views and the exposure, it's not a bad call. If your business is interested, if you are interested, please get in touch with me. Feel free to jump in the comments, and I will let you know how to get in touch with me privately, and we can discuss that. If not, look, I appreciate you watching along, and continue following along, because you never know what's around the corner with Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. So until next time, thanks so much for watching. Again, like and subscribe. We'll see you soon. Happy New Year.